Hi, my name is Doug McGraw, and this is my presentation on first responder mental health. The objectives for today are one will cover the need for mental health care for first responders. We'll talk about the stigmas and a couple of things on how do we remove those stigmas, which ties in a little bit to peer support. We'll go over touch on peer support and how that's important for first responders and for agencies to have these programs. And then we'll look at some of the treatment options that are out there, and we'll talk about some of the ethical responsibilities of clinicians that are wrapped up in that. So the need for mental health care. Exposure to traumatic events is a big thing within the first responder community. Whether it be a large scale incident or it be just one individual call, there's a lot of things that we respond to and that we see that do have an effect on first responders. The career itself will change first responders. You do, and I can attest to this as a firefighter, you do change as a person over the course of your career. And here's a quote from Gil Martin out of his book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. And it says, the veteran officer retiring after 20 or more years of service may not even vaguely resemble the positive, committed, and highly motivated recruit who began the journey. And the sad fact of the matter is there's truth to that. And I've seen it happen. Another area here for the need for mental health care is the PTSD rates and the incidence of PTSD among first responders. In the article, and it's in the reference page, Lanza et al., first responders are 8 to 32% higher, have a high 8 to 32% higher rate of PTSD than the normal population. So it's a real thing. And then when we look at where that leads into suicide rates, and you look at firefighters of reported suicides, because a lot of them don't get reported, it's fastly becoming the leading cause of what we consider line of duty death among firefighters. And the article in Firehouse magazine that Draymond did on the need for peer support, he showed that 47% of firefighters that were surveyed, and they surveyed over 1,000 firefighters, reported suicidal ideation, and that was among active and retired firefighters. So I have removing the stigma here, but we'll look at stigmas and we'll talk about throughout this the need for them to be removed. There's systemic stigma, which is a fear that first responders have that they will be viewed in a bad light by their peers, or even that they'd be viewed in a bad light by the public, that we'd be letting down this heroic persona that we're supposed to carry with us. And there's a self-stigma, which is the tendency of responders to view themselves in a negative way. And what happens there, and what goes on with that is that where it's like, you may not look down on or view your coworker as a less of a person for seeking out mental health, but you view yourself as less of a person or weak for having to seek out mental health care. And there's also fear that sensitive information would be made public or would be made known to the rest of the department and could damage your reputation. So as we move into peer support can help with these things. Peer support can help with removing stigmas. And peer support is just what it sounds like. It's peer-to-peer kind of entry-level, first-level counseling, if you will. And the peer support members are trained. On our department, we go through a 40-hour class. By no means does that make you licensed, but it gives you some of the tools to help out in that immediate time frame where to be able to make contact with someone that may be needing help. And you can also work with the firefighters to help them understand that the counselors that we use and build that bridge between firefighter and counselor, that it's okay to go see the counselor. They also help with cultural competency. Peer support can help break down that that barrier, and cultural competency of counselors, or the lack of cultural competency, has been shown to be a barrier to first responders wanting to go seek out help. So peer support can help bridge that gap and those cultural competency gaps. And this also lends a certain level of social support, where Lanza et al. Found that first responders that have a social support network are less likely to develop the symptoms of PTSD. Treatment options. There's motivational interviewing, critical incident stress management, cognitive behavioral therapy, and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And motivational interviewing seems to be a good first start, where it encourages buy-in from the first responder, because that's and with that, within the motivational interviewing, it helps the first responder feel safe and in a non-judgmental atmosphere, where they're able to have that buy-in or give input and work with the clinician on goals and options for what they want for outcomes from the treatment. There's also cognitive behavior therapy, or cognitive processing therapy, brief eclectic therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which I've done and it works. And there's also ethical responsibilities of the clinicians, that they have an ethical responsibility to practice within their scope of practice, or within their scope of what their skill sets are. From a biblical perspective standpoint, there is a responsibility on both sides to remove perceptions and reduce the barriers to care. Just as the clinicians should take on the ethical responsibility to recognize that there's a need for mental health care in first responders, and to gain a cultural competency, first responders also need to reduce the stigma and know and understand that these clinicians do have the tools and the knowledge to be able to help them. There needs to be a willingness of first responders to seek treatment. And again, clinicians do need to make an effort to gain a cultural competency. So the verse that this reminds me of is Proverbs 12:15. The way of fools seem right to them, but the wise listen to advice. And that's just it. We all need to put down, if there are barriers or whatever, we all need to come together, first responders, and work together to reduce these stigmas that we have in our own culture of it being a weakness to seek out mental health care. So in conclusion, and wrapping up, there is a recognition. We looked at the recognition of the need for mental health care, and this is gaining ground. It's becoming, it's kind of a hot topic right now in mental health care. It's gaining ground. There is ground being gained on removing the stigma. In my department, it is, people talk openly about going and seeing the counselor, so it works, and we've seen that, and that's part of our peer support program that has been able to make that possible. The proper treatment needs to be provided. It's right for the patient, it's not forced, and it's within the clinician's skill set. And there needs to be a cultural competence. There needs to be a cultural competence on both sides. We need to both understand each other. So concluding, and I'd like to conclude with this quote here from Lanza. Rather than endorsing the myth or positive stereotype of superheroes who do not have needs for care, psychologists respect that first responders are equally vulnerable to the psychological effects of trauma and have individual and cultural differences. Psychologists need to recognize this underserved population. And I do believe this is happening. I do believe that clinicians are gaining ground with cultural competency, and firefighters are gaining ground with removing stigmas. And then the last page is the reference pages for anyone that would like to look up any of the resources that were used for this presentation. Thank you.